It's truly rare for a TV show to frustrate so many people while also keeping them completely invested in its story, but somehow From has managed to do exactly that. So after rewatching all 4 seasons and seeing how far it managed to drop in quality when comparing season 1 to season 4, I wanted to talk about how a show so good can be so bad at the same time. From didn't become as successful as it did through massive marketing campaigns. Its success came from people recommending it to each other, so it's really no surprise that it built such a large and passionate audience. Being a mystery box show only amplified that. People became obsessed with putting together theories, searching for clues, and trying to interpret every detail they could find. At first, reading those theories was genuinely exciting. Some made perfect sense, some were completely ridiculous, and some were entertaining precisely because of how far they went. The creators encouraging people to look for clues was also a brilliant way to build an audience and get people to come back and rewatch every episode carefully to try and find clues they might have missed on the first watch. Of course, some people took it even further. For some, solving the mystery before everyone else became part of the fun and can be interpreted as a sort of competition. I've seen countless posts that begin with something like, "I'm posting this here so I can prove I called it first." Everybody wants to be the person who discovers something nobody else did. Unfortunately, that passion also created a very divided fandom. During season 4, after almost every episode, I would go online to read people's thoughts and theories. Instead of just seeing discussions about the story, I often found people arguing with each other. Anyone who criticized the show was dismissed as having TikTok brain or accused of watching while scrolling on their phone, simply not paying enough attention to what was happening on screen. It's as if valid criticism is not allowed in this fandom because it gets mixed up with hate toward the show, which then turns into arguments between fans. Ironically, I think this happens because people care. In this case, the audience isn't just asked to watch, it's invited to participate. The show encourages you to search for clues, defend your theories, question your own conclusions, and spend the entire week thinking about what you just watched. But none of this means that From as a show is without fault. As much as I enjoyed watching From, it wouldn't be fair to say that everything about it works. In fact, the longer the show has gone on, the more its flaws have started overshadowing the things that made it good in the first place. One of the biggest misconceptions about From is that it never gives us answers. I don't think that's entirely true. Compared to where we were at the end of season 1, we know much more about this world now. The problem is that many answers still feel incomplete. The show often explains what happened while leaving enough uncertainty for countless interpretations to exist. Sometimes that works. Other times, it feels like the writers are reluctant to fully commit to an explanation. That becomes more frustrating, but some of the biggest clarifications happen outside the show itself. Ideas like the residents being brought to this place because they were at a crossroads in their lives have been discussed and confirmed through interviews, social media, and Reddit AMAs, rather than properly established within the story. Even then, the biggest question remains unanswered. Why these particular people when so many others are at crossroads in their lives almost daily? What makes these people special? The acceptable answer can't be that only 2 of them are reincarnated and the rest are just collateral damage. The gap between what the show knows behind the scenes and what it actually shows us on screen leads into the biggest problem From has developed over time: pacing. When I say pacing, I don't mean every episode needs to be packed with monsters or shocking twists. Some of the greatest television shows ever made are slow burns. They use quieter moments to develop characters, strengthen relationships, and give audiences reasons to care. From doesn't always do that. Especially in seasons 3 and 4, slower episodes often feel less like meaningful development and more like a delay before the next important event. Season 1 had a much better balance by comparison. Every episode either introduced a new rule, expanded the mystery, or developed the characters. As the seasons went on, those meaningful developments became increasingly spread apart. The show constantly asks us to wait for this vision to make sense, wait for this object to become important, wait for this character to finally have a purpose. Part of the reason this became more noticeable is because the show itself began repeating certain patterns. In a way, that makes sense. From is a story about cycles, and the characters are literally trapped inside one. But there is a difference between repeating a theme and repeating the same storytelling structure. Season 2 is where I noticed this for the first time. The arrival of the bus mirrors the beginning of the show. Just like the Matthews family, a new group of people arrives, doesn't believe what they're being told, and has to experience their first night surrounded by monsters. Even the circumstances of their arrival look familiar. Instead of a car crash, the town is dealing with yet another major disaster in the form of the collapsed Matthews house. On paper, that fits the idea that the place repeats history, but as a viewer, it also created the feeling that we were watching the same story happen again with different characters, and this is something that keeps repeating every season. The problem is, every time the show resets in this way, it spends a lot of time bringing us back to the same emotional starting point instead of moving the story forward. The cycle might be intentional, but that doesn't always make it satisfying to watch. The same issue applies to the characters themselves. Many of them feel like they're waiting for the story to eventually decide when their next important moment should happen. Sometimes that payoff arrives, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes we're still waiting 4 seasons later. There are plenty of characters I could use as an example, but I'll talk about Julie, because there are hints that she could become incredibly important in season 5. And honestly, because I needed an excuse to mention that wig they gave her this last season. What were they thinking with that? Endless meme potential aside, it just looked awful. Now back to the video. Through the first 2 seasons, she's mostly a passive character, a brooding teenager so to speak, but at the end of season 2 she gets trapped in the dungeon alongside Randall and Marielle, which feels like the beginning of something huge. Then at the end of season 3 we learn that she has ability to story walk, which should be a massive revelation, except season 4 barely moves that storyline forward before putting it on hold again, turning her into just another person wandering around talking about how this place messes with your head. Once again, we're asked to wait for a payoff that may or may not come later. The same problem extends to the rest of the cast. The creators often describe From as a character-driven story, but after 4 seasons, that becomes incredibly difficult to support. We know pieces of these people's lives, but rarely enough to truly understand them. Tabitha has become one of the most important characters in the show's mythology, yet we know surprisingly little about who she actually is. Almost everything we learn about her revolves around visions, memories, and reincarnation, rather than her life before arriving in Fromville. We do know about certain events that shaped her past, but very little about her motivations or what kind of person she was before she became trapped here. At the same time, she has become a repetitive character who frustrates the audience because she holds such an important role in the story. The plot can't move forward without her, yet she's often written in a way that actively delays that progression. As a result, instead of wanting to follow her journey, many people simply find her character unlikable. The dialogue hasn't helped either. Season 4 especially took a noticeable dip in quality. Conversations stopped feeling natural, with characters starting a thought, pausing awkwardly mid-sentence, and then abruptly moving on to something else. Rather than adding tension or realism, those pauses in conversations became distracting, pulling audiences out of the experience instead of drawing them further into it. Another common criticism during the first 3 seasons was that the characters refused to communicate. Everyone kept saying they were scared, that nobody would believe them, or that they didn't want people to think they were crazy. Under normal circumstances, that would make sense, but these people live in a town where monsters appear every night. Impossible things happen constantly, and nobody can physically leave. At some point, the supernatural should stop being the unbelievable part. To the show's credit, this did begin to somewhat change. Seasons 3 and 4 especially have characters sharing more information, but for the sake of making the story last longer than it should, the characters started refusing to believe each other. Boyd, I'm looking at you. We're talking here about a man whose headworms living in his blood watched his dead wife's hand reach out from her grave to grab him, killed one of the monsters only to find out they come back in the most twisted way imaginable, and a lot more. Yet, he still dismisses Jade when he tells him about seeing the doors beneath Colony House while on a mushroom trip. Things like this don't read as believable disagreements between characters anymore. They're just the plot deliberately slowing itself down. On the other hand, some conversations have the opposite issue. Instead of withholding information, characters repeat it all the time. Fatima spends quite a bit of time in season 4 repeating the same story about her father to different people, which is a story that she first mentioned in season 1. But when she tells Ellis about the golem in episode 6 of season 4, it feels more aimed at the audience, because the show went on a 2-week hiatus mid-season, so it plays like a reminder of what might matter in the episodes to come. Season 4 in particular is overfilled with issues of all kinds, but one thing that should have been the highlight of of the season was the man in yellow, and that also got severely mishandled. His introduction at the end of season 3 was fantastic. He immediately felt like one of the most intimidating forces in the show, and after years of wondering what was behind everything happening in Fromville, it finally seemed like we were about to meet the force pulling the strings. Unfortunately, that excitement disappeared quickly because the writers thought that it would be a great idea to introduce the man in yellow as some random girl who had just arrived in town and to tell the audience about it immediately at the end of the same episode. The writers wanted the audience to finally be ahead of the characters and to know something they don't, which in my opinion was not the best choice, or it just had poor execution. I haven't really decided yet. Instead of creating suspense, it just made the other characters look dumb for not noticing how obviously suspicious Sophia looked at all times. And I won't even comment on those scenes with Clara and then Elgin. In my opinion, it would have worked much better if the man in yellow had taken the form of someone we already know. A familiar face would have created a stronger emotional reaction and allowed the mystery to build naturally instead of introducing a completely new character. These are ultimately some of my frustrations with From, but by far the biggest one was the season finale. For the first time, it didn't leave me excited for more. It left me underwhelmed. Every previous season ended with a moment that fundamentally changed how I viewed the story. Tabitha discovering the tunnels, the lighthouse, and her escape into the real world, Jim's death at the end of season 3. This last season gave us the biggest revelation of the entire series. The story finally moved, and yet it somehow felt strangely flat. Despite everything that happened in the finale with the kids' bones and Fatima turning into one of the monsters, it still left me feeling empty, not especially excited for what's coming. I honestly can't think of another show whose reputation depends so heavily on its ending. From has spent its entire run asking its audience to be patient and trust the process. So season 5 doesn't just have to conclude the story, it has to justify everything that came before it. That is why the pacing matters more than ever. Earlier seasons had the luxury of slowly building the world and introducing mysteries, but the final season can't afford to spend large amounts of time delaying the moments audiences have been waiting for years to happen. It needs to feel like the story is finally moving forward and bringing everything together. The good news is that I don't think the writers have painted themselves into an impossible corner yet. Despite all my criticism, From has been surprisingly consistent with its larger mythology. After rewatching all 4 seasons, I genuinely believe they know where the story is going. And as the writers themselves have said, it's not about where the story ends, it's about how it gets there. A lot of the anxiety surrounding the finale comes from comparisons to Lost. Harold Perrineau was part of that show, and some people behind the scenes of From also worked on Lost. Since Lost's ending remains one of the most divisive finales in television history, people worry that From could make similar mistakes. Hopefully what the writers have been saying for years is true, and this story will not end with a simple "it was all a dream" explanation that ignores everything we've invested in. In order for this show to be remembered as a successful one, the final season doesn't need some impossible twist just to surprise people. It should just focus on what it has already established, connect the most important pieces of the mystery, give the characters satisfying conclusions that make sense and don't come out of nowhere, and finally allow the story to move forward instead of constantly pushing the payoff into the future. And that's probably the best way to describe my relationship with this show right now. I still love it. I still think it's one of the best mysteries currently on television. I will watch season 5 for sure, but I can't ignore that somewhere along the way, the journey started feeling a lot longer than it needed to be. I just want to say thank you to everyone who took time to watch this video. Thank you for all your support, all the likes, comments, and subs. It all means a great deal to me, and I appreciate every single one of you. Seeing this channel continue to grow and seeing more and more people join this community is something I never take for granted. I'm incredibly grateful for all the support you've given me, and I truly can't wait to see where we go next.